Good morning. My name is Kate Franta, and on behalf of First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, Delaware, I welcome you this morning here in the sanctuary and for all of you streaming at home. October is Heritage Month here, and to welcome you, no matter your heritage, I thought I could go through the alphabet and name various locations from around the globe, as in you are welcome here if your ancestors hail from Armenia, Bolivia, Chickasaw, Denmark, Ethiopia, France. But I thought that might get a little old really fast. But it would still not be as inclusive as we are in our hearts, because no matter your heritage, you are welcome here. And we celebrate that we learn from each other, whatever your identity, whatever your gender, and whomever you love. We welcome you. For more info about us, our website is firstuuwilm.org. Take a peek and see what treasures you can find and activities to enjoy. And now, let us prepare our hearts and minds for worship.
So, good morning. I'm the Reverend Larry Piers. I have the joy and privilege of being here as minister of First Unitarian Church of Wilmington. So glad we have the First U Women's Choir. Let's give them a hand before we hear a note. And, it's not just the women's choir. And Bob, too. Okay, sorry, I thought it was the women's choir. All right, and of course, Kathy Harris, our AV team, and I'm so glad that Kate Franta is joining us as a worship associate. I have to announce the passing of one of our members this morning. Mary Kalat died last night at 7. I know some of you, 7 p.m. or so, I know some of you are from the Cokesbury community. My memory of Mary is when I visited her in the health center, sat in her room, and she had her furniture that she had set up in that room. She had photographs of the times of her life and told me a few stories about who she is. And so some of you have more treasured memories of her, but I'd like to light this candle as a way to honor her presence in this community and in all the ways that her memories will still radiate within and among us. Let's pause for a moment, please. May her memory continue to be a blessing to her family and to those who knew and loved her. Amen. Our call to worship includes these verses from the Persian poet Sadi Shirazi, who wrote, "To worship God is nothing other than to serve the people. It does not need rosaries or prayer carpets or robes. All peoples are members of the same body, created from one essence. If fate brings suffering to one member, the others cannot stay at rest."
If you have a chalice at home, I invite you to join me by lighting it as Reverend Larry lights ours here. Today's words are adapted from our opening hymn. Hail the glorious golden city. We are builders of that city. All our lives are building stones, and the work that we have builded will live and shine transfigured. It will pass into the splendors of the city of light. May the light of this chalice remind us not only that we are building, but also to stay mindful of what we are building in our inner and outer worlds. Now, please rise in body or spirit for our opening hymn, number 140. The words should appear on the screen, and remain standing as the hymn concludes. And now please join me in affirming our mission. First Unitarian Church of Wilmington is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action.
So I want, before I offer this meditation and prayer, I want to say a little more than what I usually do, so bear with me. I found sanctuary this week in an unexpected place. My dear friend, Rabbi Sheila Weinberg, who some of you met when she came here and spoke and shared from her book, God Loves the Stranger, last year, has been very active in the American Friends of Combatants for Peace. This is an organization founded by former Israeli and Palestinian soldiers and combatants who, over 15 years ago, in a time of active conflict, dropped their weapons and dedicated themselves to peace. They have risked connecting across their histories to boldly imagine and practice acts of understanding, healing, and connection, believing in a future where all people live in peace with dignity, justice, and liberty. Rabbi Sheila sent me a recording of a recent call of these Palestinian, Israeli, Muslim, and Jewish folks, and hosted by the American Friends of Combatants for Peace. Here I found sanctuary in a call focused on the topic of humanity and hope, even a time of hurting and suffering and great pain, as many of us know. One of the facilitators of the call acknowledged, "Is a miracle that we have gathered. Hope and humanity are a radical commitment in a time of war." It's not easy in a time of war to connect with those who are different from you, to practice listening, to stay curious, to practice connection, and to be a peacemaker in a time of war. I, she said, want to honor the miracle that I see. With over 500 people on that call, different voices acknowledge that it has become more dangerous for them to talk about peace. Yet they dared to gather and to share their own pain and suffering. Many who had friends or family who had died, who were grieving, or who were suffering because of recent events. To hold on to deep humanity, as one speaker said, to try to guard the small flame of hope we carry, and even especially in this difficult and painful time for all of us. Another spoke this truth: if we need to check the nationality, the ethnicity, the color of the person before we decide if we should cry over this child or if we should not, there are many people these days, enough people for us to say we can cry for everyone, Israeli and Palestinians, and all those who are impacted by these events. So may our candle this morning honor the suffering of all who are suffering as a result of this conflict now. May this be a small flame of hope that some are kindling even in the midst of unspeakable horror, unnecessary suffering, and unfathomable pain. Let us open our hearts to a common humanity that knows no boundary of nationality, religion, ethnicity, or geography. This has been a heartbreaking and a soul-stretching, straining time in our world, to say the least. Yet you have shown up in this sanctuary, in this room, or online. And we realize that sanctuary for us does not need to be a place of retreat from our world. May sanctuary be for us a place to be with that which is holy within us and before us. May sanctuary be for us a place to show up not only when it all makes sense or when we have it all figured out. May we create sanctuary with each other even when there are no easy answers or ready resolutions. For we know that it takes heart, it takes courage, it takes faith. May we be present to one another and to the circumstances of our own lives and the circumstances of our world in this moment. May we be present. May we be open to presence, even when absence can seem like the most rational response. So in closing, I share these words from a psalm, and let these words be our prayer. Shelter us with your peace. And let all of our worries release. All of us beneath your wings, guard our hearts, protect our souls. Let us rise up completed and whole. All of us beneath your wings, the wings of peace. So may we center in peace, even during this troubling time. May we kindle even the smallest flame of hope within us and among us. May we hold hope for humanity as we move now into this time of shared silence. We also bring with us whatever burdens or concerns are weighing in our own heart. And we take time to attend to those concerns, and if we wish, to share them with others. We also take time to leave just a little space for whatever whispers of the Spirit might be coming through us as experiences of joy as well. So let's take a moment now and just attend to our own hearts. And in a moment, I'll invite you to share your concerns and any joys you may be having as well So let's pause first. So what concerns might you want to speak aloud in this room or write in the chat? Let's take a moment and attend to one another. Anyone?
Ukrainian people.
Israel, Gaza, Syria. Co-op family. No, it's great.
We need not carry these concerns alone, but carry them alongside of one another and open ourselves to be instruments of love, peace, compassion, and healing. Is there a joy? Is there a joy that you are holding in your heart that you recognize is there even alongside of whatever concerns there might be about our world? Is there one joy that you would like to share in this room or on the chat?
The marriage of our granddaughter to her bride.
Okay.
I'm here.
Who was that? Oh, okay. It is a joy to see you. The beauty of the fall.
The joy of the grandchildren.
The joy of married life.
Yeah.
A life truly lived, loving.
Yeah.
Generation coming up.
She said the great new generation coming up. She meant all of you. Butterflies. So notice how a smile comes to our own face when we hear the joy of another. So may all those names who were spoken and those unspoken find peace and healing this day as we now hear our musical meditation.
Christ.
Our reading today is adapted from Stephen Cope's The Great Work of Your Life, a Guide for the Journey to Your Calling, True Calling. As the curtain rises on chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita, we are at the scene of an impending battle. Krishna, the charioteer, and Arjuna, the young warrior, have driven their chariot to the edge of the battleground. Arjuna surveys the scene and speaks urgently to his charioteer. "I see omens of chaos, Krishna." As we survey the battlefield in our mind's eye, we feel, with Arjuna, a visceral sense of foreboding. The narrator has already told us that the forces of light and the forces of darkness are about to collide, and that this battle will tear up the fabric of the world. Imagine our two heroes as they prepare for this world-shattering conflict. Krishna, the charioteer, is dark-skinned and handsome. He is steady, regal, unwavering. We'll find out later that he is God in one of the many disguises. Arjuna, our bold warrior, he too is handsome, but not so steady as Krishna. He is young and brash and immature. He is highly prized by his family and idealized by the common people. "Krishna," says Arjuna, as the narrative opens, "halt my chariot between the armies, far enough for me to see these men who lust for war." Arjuna surveys the scene of the impending battle, and what does he see? A sight that undoes him. Arjuna sees his own kinsmen arrayed against him. He sees, as he says to Krishna, fathers, grandfathers, teachers, uncles, brother, sons, grandsons, and friends gathered in the opposing army. Arjuna, observing all this, is loath to become part of the pernicious disorder infecting the kingdom. He is reluctant to take his part in this battle, even though it is manifestly his sacred duty. "Conflicting sacred duties confound my reason," Arjuna cries to Krishna. A cry of doubt. Arjuna split down the middle. How should he act? As a great warrior, Arjuna has always known that his sacred duty is to fight on the side of the right in a just war. And according to the rules of war so clearly laid out in the scriptures, rules that are as close to Arjuna as his own heart, this is indeed a just war. The peace of the kingdom has been profoundly disrupted by the unjust usurpation of the throne. The people of the realm will suffer as a result of this unjust usurpation. It is Arjuna's duty to fight. And yet, he is confronted with a problem above and beyond the normal challenges of war. We'll pause. The normal challenges of war. He sees that his own people are standing against him. Will he kill them? If he does, he will take on the karma of this act and suffer for many lifetimes to come. However, if he does not act, he will betray his code, the sacred duty that has given his very life meaning. Arjuna is caught on the horns of a vicious dilemma. "We don't know which weight is worse to bear," Arjuna says to Krishna. "Our conquering them or their conquering us?" Arjuna feels the conflict viscerally. "Krishna," he says, "my limbs sing, my mouth is parched, my body trembles, the hair bristles on my flesh, the magic bow slips from my hand, my skin burns, I cannot stand still, my mind reels." Arjuna sees clearly that having executed his sacred duty and having slain his own kinsman, he will not himself be able to go on living. What should he do? Arjuna does perhaps the most sensible thing possible. He falls to the floor of the chariot. I cannot fight this fight, he cries to Krishna. And then Arjuna falls silent.
Thank you, Kate. Arjuna lies on the floor of the chariot and proclaims to Krishna, I cannot fight this fight. And then Arjuna falls silent. Can we join in solidarity with that silence for just a moment? That universal silence that any one of us may feel at times when it seems that we are facing unsurmountable challenges, are confronted by a dilemma, wondering how we ought to proceed, particularly as it was in Arjuna's case, when we have to decide between two equally painful choices. And we are stymied or even paralyzed, as Arjuna was. And maybe our only response is silence. For Arjuna, whatever he decided to do meant that someone would be hurt, someone would die, and he would be instrumental in either outcome. I suspect and I sincerely hope that for us, our dilemmas are less trying, much less dramatic sets of circumstances perhaps that we face. Yet this is the universal dilemma expressed in this verse in our hymn by the Unitarian James Russell Lowell. Once to every soul and nation comes the moment to decide. That was Arjuna's dilemma. And typically, it's our dilemma too when we face moments in which we must choose, knowing that each decision has consequences. Psychologists call it a disorienting dilemma. It's described in this way. A disorienting dilemma, try to say that fast, disorienting dilemma, usually occurs when people have experiences that do not fit their expectations or make sense to them, and they cannot resolve the situations without some change in their view of the world. This dilemma is also sometimes described as a state of disequilibrium. Now some of you are waking up. You recognizing this disequilibrium that happens in our lives. It happens in our world so often these days that it might feel like we're in perpetual disequilibrium. It may seem that this disorienting dilemma is an everyday occurrence rather than an occasional interruption in our lives. Those in the course of taking a journey with the Transcendentalists with me heard last Wednesday that disorienting dilemma in Ralph Waldo Emerson's life following the unexpected death of his first wife only 14 months after they were married. It turned his life upside down, or we could say it turned his life inside out, as times of disequilibrium can do for any of us. These are moments when we necessarily turn inward and question everything. These are times when we, as the poet Rilke remarks, when we live the questions themselves. These are the times when we search for inner resources and for deeper sources of strength and courage and faith. We are facing collective times of disorientation as well as personal ones. We've come through a collective disorienting time with the pandemic when we ask different questions of ourselves. We are in the midst of brutal murders and senseless killings in the Palestine and Gaza war. So we can't help but ask ourselves, how could this happen? Why is this happening? How could God allow this, ask some. And most often we ask, what can we do? What can be done? Disorienting dilemmas and times of disorientation are the very stuff that our lives are made of. It's these times that when we are in the thick of things, that we sometimes awaken from our slumber, find ways to respond that we might not even know were within us. Sure, we have other choices. We could dull our senses. Sure, we could inhibit our awareness. Sure, we can addict ourselves to dopamine rushes by scrolling through our social media, hitting likes or looking for replies. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. Sure, we can suppress the consciousness that is wanting to awaken in us. Sure, we can relinquish response. These are always choices that are available to us. Yet, we have come into the force field of this sanctuary, this particular sanctuary, and we risk staying awake, at least for a few more minutes. We risk being stimulated to care about one another in the world. We endeavor to stay with dilemmas and disorientation rather than flee from them, because we know that is how deeper change happens. Amen? Arjuna's dilemma, as narrated in the Gita, is not particular to him. It is a universal one, and that is why this classic has held on for so long for so many people as a source of wisdom. In fact, the Bhagavad Gita, the Gita, was a text that J. Robert Oppenheimer turned to again and again. He delved into it, was captivated by it. He gave copies to others. He kept a copy on his desk. He studied Sanskrit so he could translate it himself. Having seen the recent movie Oppenheimer and read most of the book American Prometheus, the biography that the movie is based on, I came to appreciate why Oppenheimer was so enamored with the Gita. To cut to the chase, he was a person of contradictions. He lived in the tensions that would haunt him his whole life. And like Arjuna, he also sought to live out his particular dharma, his specific calling, and to be as true to it as he could until he couldn't. Oppenheimer, I'm going to resist calling him Opie, which was his preferred name, returned to this classic, this Hindu classical text, even though he was raised in a secular Jewish family who were engaged in the Ethical Culture Society in New York. The ethical culture movement, as some of you may know, was founded in 1876 by the philosopher Felix Adler, and it is explicitly a non-theistic, humanist community. In fact, the lyrics of our opening hymn this morning, "Hail the Glorious Golden City," were written by Felix Adler, this founder of ethical culture. The hymn includes these verses. We are builders of that city, all our joys and all our groans help to rear its shining ramparts. All our lives are building stones, whether humble or exalted, we are called to tasks divine. All must aid alike to carry forward one sublime design. Perhaps you get the thrust of those words, the impact that those words might have had on people at a particular time, their own sense of agency and responsibility for whatever would unfold through their own lives, through their own efforts, through their own actions. And since that hymn was written in 1878, I imagine that the Oppenheimers who attended the Ethical Culture Society in New York sang that song. I imagine Oppenheimer, I almost said Opie, Oppenheimer, who went to the Ethical Culture School of New York. I speculate he also heard this hymn and perhaps sang it. And indeed, it was this sentiment that he came under the influence of this perspective, as Oppenheimer's biographers stated. These sons and daughters of the relatively prosperous patrons, is the sound coming through okay? Okay. The Ethical Culture Society were infused with the notion that they were being groomed to reform the world, that they were the vanguard of a highly modern ethical gospel. They go on to declare that Robert was a star student. Through the formative years of his childhood and education, he was surrounded by men and women who thought of themselves as catalysts for a better world. Whether humble or exalted, all are called to the task divine. Understanding his infusion in this background of ethical culture to make a difference in the world and be a catalyst for a better world was, of course, a promise and an optimistic possibility that drove Oppenheimer to travel to the edges of the science of his time, to learn from those who were exploring quantum physics that redefined our ways of thinking about the world in its atomic terrain. He grasped and he immersed himself in that task as a pure theoretical scientist, and perhaps would have been satisfied with his research and his teaching. And then he was snatched up to direct a secretive project, the Manhattan Project, to develop what they refer to as the gadget, the first atom bomb. His world changed, and the world has been changed ever since. It is this life task that caused him to be famous, but also caused a disorienting dilemma in his own life and work from thenceforth. This is what made his attraction, I think, to the Gita so prescient. As one writer would say, he would find himself in nearly the same quandary, figuratively and literally, as Arjuna. Asked to lead the Manhattan Project amid another great war, he became a scientist given a warrior's task, the writer says. The war would continue whether Oppenheimer took part in it or not, as it had been for Arjuna, and there would be loss of life with or without him. Should he participate, or should he withdraw? In exploring his correspondence and his journal entries, the biographers Bird and Sherwin in American Prometheus concluded that Oppenheimer was acutely attuned to the consequences of his action. But like Arjuna, he was also driven by his duty. So duty and ambition overrode his doubts, though doubt remained in the form of an ever-present awareness of his own human frailty. The message of the Gita can seem fatalistic to most of us in contemporary culture, since its message seems to be, when considering your dharma, you should not vacillate. It's your destiny. You're meant to do it. Now, the subtitle of this biography, on which the movie is based, the subtitle captures the dilemma of Oppenheimer's life, the triumph and the tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer. While his life can boast of many extraordinary academic and scientific accomplishments, he also had a somewhat tragic inner and interpersonal life with depression, infidelity, and strained and awkward relationships with his peers, with women, his co-workers, and mentors. And at the same time, he would be hailed as the father of the atom bomb. He had also had to live with the consequences of not just his fame, but his own misgivings after he had completed his duty as a scientist in the Manhattan Project. That was the tragedy. It was a tragedy that haunted Oppenheimer the rest of his life following the detonation of the bomb. He realized that he was part of creating a no-turning back possibility of atomic weapons, the unleashing of the nuclear arms race that would consume world powers, resources, and the fears and the anxieties of generations. This is where the Gita comes in, as one commentator states. From the Gita, he learned and rationalized that it was his duty to build the bomb, and it was the leader's duty to use it wisely, I meant to say. In other words, Oppenheimer went along with the government decisions, not because they were government decisions, but because he thought political decision-making was the duty of the government leaders and not that of scientists. Following me? This kind of compartmentalization has its benefits, and it also has its ramifications. In our time, we are faced with the dilemma of what we can do with science, for example, artificial intelligence, and how we might use what we have the capability to do responsibly and ethically, and not simply unleash dangerous ramifications without these considerations. When we compartmentalize, we sometimes create a disconnection between technology and social ethics, between science and its moral implications. Oppenheimer would later state, "I did my job, which was the job I was supposed to do." Yet the philosophy of the Gita may not be so deterministic, because the Gita realizes that yes, and I'll quote, as individual sentient beings each have different dharmas, and these dharmas, these duties can also change at different stages of one's life. So it was for Oppenheimer. Once the bomb was released in Hiroshima and then Nagasaki, he realized another duty that hadn't even occurred to him until after these events. He came to devote himself from that moment on to how he could promote a responsible use of this science and forestall further potential destruction. This became his new duty, his new dharma, his new calling. When he reached a place of disequilibrium, he came to realize that science would only take him so far. This led him in a speech to the scientists at Los Alamos right at the conclusion of their work, when they were ready to go back to their lives, to share these thoughts. And I'll share an excerpt from it now. And he's speaking to the people that he had worked with on that particular gadget the atom bomb. He says, I think we have no hope at all if we yield in our beliefs in the value of science and the good it can be to the world to know about reality, about nature. I think that if we lose our faith in this, we stop being scientists. We sell out our heritage. We lose what we have of value for this time of crisis. But there's another thing. We are not only scientists. We are, in his words, men too. We might say we are humanity too. We cannot forget our dependence on our fellow men or our fellow human beings. I mean, not only our material dependence, without which no science is possible and without which we could not work, I mean also our deep moral dependence, in that the value of science must lie in the world of our humanity, that all our roots lie there. These are the strongest bonds in the world, stronger than those even that bind us to one another. These are the deepest bonds, the bonds that bind us to our fellow human beings. I can't imagine what it was like for him to, at the conclusion of this project that had consumed him and the lives of those people that had worked with him for that long period, to be able to stand there and to say, we also have to recognize the moral implications and our duty to humanity as well. Those are deeper bonds that are broader, wider, and deeper than our bonds as just scientists. So while in public, Oppenheimer declared, I never regretted, and I do not regret now having done my part of the job, there was also that very acute realization, as seen in the movie, when he infuriated President Truman, who was considering what next step to take in terms of the development of the bomb, the hydrogen bomb or whatever. And Oppenheimer said to Truman, I have blood on my hands. It's reported that Truman called him a crybaby scientist. Who knows what the horrible turn of history would have taken if the German Nazis had developed and had the possibility of using the bomb first? Who knows if having the possibility of the bomb without actually using it would have provided enough deterrence to end the war? This was an awful dilemma that humans find themselves in time and time again. But yet we live in the legacy of a world in which nuclear weapons exist. As such, we must tell the full story and recognize the consequences and our own responsibility. It's often isn't told that the atomic test explosion itself led to devastating health consequences for about 13,000 New Mexicans who lived within a 50-mile radius of where the test occurred, and they were not warned beforehand or afterward. This exposure to radioactive material took a toll over several generations. That was not spoken of. And of course, there was the inestimable tragedy of each life lost in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The weight of the pain to each of those families and the generational collective trauma for them is also unfathomable. Unfathomable, but real. More and more, we are understanding how much we are connected with all of life and with each other's lives. Across all the imaginary boundaries that we create on maps and within our own minds, we are still interconnected. We are still interconnected. More and more, we're coming to realize that what we have released in the name of science and the development of technology and the pursuit of progress has both its benefits and its consequences. As you may have seen in the movie, when Oppenheimer began to question this military-industrial complex, what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, and want to orient his work more towards peace and the deterrence of further bombs, he became suspicious. They became suspicious of him, saw him as a threat, as non-patriotic. What I found most illuminating about the film was that it exposes us to the task that is before us, each of us in this moment, now that we live in an age where nuclear weapons are available. Can we make choices towards peace and unleash the power of peace? Must we continually be constrained by our prior commitments and our enormous investments into not just the mechanisms of war, but also the mindsets of war that have us as much as we have them? There's no direct, clear, or definitive answer to that question. That's why we call it a dilemma. Yes, I believe we must live into this question and dare to ask it. Even if we have no influence on the mechanisms of war, we are very, very much responsible for the mindsets that contribute to war. Our mindset of separation rather than connection, our mindset of identification with our labels of identity of ourselves and others, rather than our centering ourselves in our common humanity. And so on that call this week with the combatants for peace, Israelis and Palestinians, many of whom were in their own grief and sorrow, I heard this poem, and I believe it speaks to the choice before us. It's composed by Sami al-Qasim, who writes, "The day I'm killed, my killer, rifling through my pockets, will find travel tickets, one to peace, one to fields and the rain, and one to the conscience of humankind. I beg you, my dear killer, don't ignore them. Don't waste such a thing, but take and use the tickets. Please, I beg you to go traveling." So I pray that we may go traveling rather than stay stuck in forces and mindsets that keep us engaged in relentless conflicts and violence that only leads to more violence. And in this sanctuary today, I hope, I pray, I cry out with these words from Unitarian James Russell Lowell: "Once to every soul in nation comes the moment to decide." So may it be. Amen.
Thank you, Larry. Wow. So we are going to shift gears, lighten up a little bit. That was plenty of food for our souls, I believe. This is a stewardship moment. And this month, as we've mentioned, is Heritage. Larry touched on what we have inherited. But what else have we inherited? This topic, I'll confess, does not get my creative juices flowing. I have always been intrigued by others' cultures and traditions, things that felt foreign to me. This is so strong in me that I was compelled to marry outside of my culture and face all of the challenges of intercultural child rearing, complete with language differences, educational differences, a whole lot of differences. So when ruminating about my time for the stewardship moment today, knowing I'm supposed to talk about heritage in some way, it occurred to me that I really connect with my spiritual heritage. For those of you who know me, you might say, Kate, why are you a member of a UU church when you were raised in a Lutheran church? That sounds like a lack of connection. Maybe at first it does, but I say this church is a celebration of all the spiritual training I've inherited and learned across 5 decades. The various Protestant Christian congregations of my grandparents and great-grandparents coalesced into the Lutheran Church of all 4 of my grandparents, although my dad's father was baptized Catholic, just in case. But before that, going back to pre-Christian times, whoever my ancestors were, the Celts or the Druids, all the earth-based practices that go to the very beginning of my family line are all ingrained in my body, and as you all lovingly put up with, burst out of me here, in this church, where I am welcome to be a hybrid, yoga-practicing former Christian who quotes Jesus regularly, Buddhist shamanic practitioner. That's me. Where else could I go and claim this spiritual makeup and be welcome? That is why I support this church, and I invite you to do so now, too. You can give by using the Church Center app, which is so easy, even I figured it out the first time. Or you can pop over to the website and donate, and you can mail a check to the church. For those of us here in the building, you can drop your donation in the baskets at the entrance to Parish Hall after our service. But please remember, it is that time of year for guest at your table. You see the boxes around. And if you are writing a check to drop in the basket or to mail, and you please want it to go to the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, which does amazing work across the world and in the US, please actually write the check to UUSC. Sometimes the memo line doesn't quite do enough to delineate. So you will see the ways to give. Thank you for helping to give to this beloved community and give us a home. So now we're going to dedicate our offering to the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action. We dedicate our lives and these, our offerings.
My Lord, he said unto me, do you like my garden so fair? You may live in this garden if you keep the grasses green, and I'll return
Just a reminder that you are invited to stay after the service for a discussion of the movie Oppenheimer at 12:30.
No, 12 to 12.
Oh, I'm sorry, 12 to 12:30 today. So grab your coffee and say hi, and then come back into the sanctuary. There's also a lot going on here at First U, and next week is Bring a Friend to Church Week, as I recall. There was that lovely skit a couple weeks ago. So invite your friends, invite people to come and share our beautiful community. You can sign up for our e-news at firstuuwilm.org to stay informed. And now if you have a chalice at home, join us by extinguishing it as Reverend Larry extinguishes ours. This quote is from Eknath Easwaran: "All life is a battlefield. Whether we like it or not, we are born to fight. We have no choice in this, but we do have the choice of our opponent and our weapon. If we fight other people, often our dear ones, we cannot help but lose. But if we choose to fight all that is selfish and violent in us, we cannot but win."
Thank you, Aegis. So just again, a reminder, next week is our open house to the wider community. For you, it's also Bring a Friend Sunday. While bringing a friend, could you also bring some snacks to share? It's nice to kind of show some hospitality to our guests. Yes or no? And if you'd like to be one of those persons that we designate as talk to this person if you want to know more about us, you may wear yellow, just as Kate is doing in the back there. She's modeling for next week. Okay, so you might wear yellow next week as someone who also can be available to talk to someone about our congregation and your experience. So, our closing words. Dona nobis pacem. Say those words. And we know that they mean give us peace, so say those words. Give us peace. So may it be. Now let us sing together. We would be one. The words will be on the screen and also at 318 in the hymnal.